Giderak got off his horse, and his feet sank deep in the mud. He looked down and cursed his carelessness loudly when he realized that the mud came up to his ankles. The subtle pain of an old injury in his left ankle also made its appearance. The skies had suddenly opened a few hours ago, and rivers of water had washed down on him as he rode to his destination, a few days south of Calantary Fell. He had spent the last few hours listening only to the sound of the rain, hollow and metallic, as the raindrops were landing on his helmet. Hunched and wet, he looked at the inn in front of him. It was small and looked dirty, just like him, but it would do for the night. He could hear voices from inside, a spot of merriness in the middle of nowhere, a short while before night fell. The stable was to the right of the inn, dark. He walked to the stable door and shouted whether someone was there to tend to his horse, but no one answered. He decided that there was no reason to wait, and so he went inside, found an empty spot between a few scabby horses to leave his mare at, unsaddled her, and looked around to find some hay. What he found was soaked and reeked of whatever stables reeked, but he also found a rake driven inside the pile, and so he carefully moved some hay to the feeder. He wished a good appetite to Sandrisa as he petted her head and got out of the stable, heading to the inn. A plain metallic mud scraper was next to the door for him to clean his boots from the mud of the road. Giderak smiled when he saw it. These metallic blades had started disappearing for many years now in the stone-paved city of Neferkath. He noticed that a small mountain of mud had already gathered behind the blade, which meant there were enough people inside the inn. After he cleaned the mud off his shoes, he took off his helmet and put it in his sack, which was methodically attached high up on his back, secured over his shoulders and across his chest, a contraption of his. Then he opened the door and entered the inn, under the sounds of folk music of the surrounding area. Only the owner turned to look at him, obviously curious about the new customer. There were enough people inside already. Young farmers who played dice, old men who teased the girls carrying the drinks, men of the border guard who drank their time away. Two young men were entertaining the customers from a corner of the inn, a red-haired one who played a pipe and could usually sing, and a second with a sly smile who juggled 3 or 4 oranges in the air. The owner waved for him to approach, and Giderak slowly walked to his counter. He welcomed him with a smile and in a good mood. "Welcome, traveler," he told him. "What can I offer you? I have ale, strong ale, and even stronger ale. I also have some good food, a few empty rooms, and we have lots of good people here tonight. Drink, music, dance, dice, women. You can find everything in here, whatever you want." He did not like the tone of the innkeeper's voice, and most of all, he did not like the way his eyes gleamed. It was not the first inn Giderak had ever visited, and he could tell when someone viewed him as a few silver coins and nothing more. And it was not the first time he was passing by this particular inn, even if the innkeeper didn't remember him. Of course, it had been many years since then. Too many. It was back in the days when he was hunting Kravarek down. "To start, I want someone to go and tend to my horse. I left it in the stable next to here, even though I did not find a stable boy there." The innkeeper made a movement with his hand as if he had the solution ready, and shouted the boy's name, accompanying it with a few curses for him to come quicker. A child of about 10 came out of the back room with snot running down his nose and clothes stained with... he did not want to know with what. The child immediately understood what had happened, and with his eyes to the floor, asked Giderak about his horse, apologizing humbly and truthfully for not being there to tend to it when he arrived. He carefully listened to Giderak's description of a brown mare, with white spots between the eyes. The boy almost killed himself to run to the stable, as the innkeeper was cleaning a cup with his dirty, from wine and oil stains apron, pointedly looking at Giderak as if trying to show him that all these things were insignificant, and it was about time to tell him what he would have to spend. He was ready to order a beer when he felt a playful touch on his right arm. He lowered his eyes to see what had happened, and saw another slender hand over his own. When he turned to see to whom it belonged to, he came face to face with a beautiful dark-skinned girl with green eyes. A big, gorgeous, and somewhat sly smile had formed on her lips, and black hair that reached to her shoulders contained her face. "I truly hope that mare of yours is not the only woman in your life, nor the only female you can ride," she told him with that same smile, which contained inklings as to what they could both do together. She had a slightly southern accent, and the color of her skin reminded him of the deserts of Kileth, where he had spent a few months of his youth once. Gidrak smiled, amused. I spent all day on a saddle, so I'd want you to be on top tonight for a change, he told her. She laughed, and he understood it was his signal to go on. I get the impression that you not see a lot of action around here, he told her with the same cheeky smile she also had. She laughed again and leaned forward to him to whisper in his ear. I think you're the only person I have seen in this inn, for a long time now, with whom it's worth spending a night with. She thought she had tied him, and very quickly at that. It was clear she knew what to tell him. You honor me, he replied. The girl was much too beautiful for this place, and the prospect of a night with her was enticing, excited him. He turned to the innkeeper. How much do you want for a room? 1 night. 5 silver coins. 7 if you want clean seats. The man was a scalper. 7 then. He asked the girl to go upstairs to the room and wait for him there, and order the beer he wanted. And don't pour me any of the watered down kind unless you're in the mood for trouble. The innkeeper angrily glared at him with a look of pure hate and proceeded to serve him the beer, slamming the cup on the counter with anger, which resulted in much of the drink being spilled. Gidrak looked at him without a word, his glance full of meaning, and the innkeeper refilled the cup and gave it back to him, calmly this time. Gidrak took the cup and took a sip, and then started looking around him in the loud room. He had come to this inn for a very specific reason, and his eyes immediately landed upon the old man with a brown cloak, sitting alone, hunched over an old table, the cloak's cowl covering his head. He was looking only deep inside his drink, coughed heavily, murmured after every cough, and turned to look behind his back every so often. This must have been old Tostig, one and the same with the description he had received a few days earlier in Velez, the last city he had been to as he was traveling to the northwest. According to his informant, old Tostig wasn't too well in the head. He had seen things, had lived a rough life. He went to his table, walking normally, without showing any fear. May I sit, old man? Tostig cocked his head and pinned Gidrak with a hazy, drunken stare. Only one of his eyes could be seen under the cowl, the way he had raised and turned his head to Gidrak. Which fucker are you again? He said with difficulty, chewing his words as if he had forgotten how to speak, as if he was discovering that his mouth could also do something else other than drinking. A traveller. I want information. Ah, yes, a traveller, he said, and the trace of a disbelieving smile started forming on his lips. He started chuckling inside of him, as if remembering something which brought him an inexplicable glee. Yes, you sure do look like a traveller. You're a hard-looking fellow, you have a proud posture, a nice chin, a few days' beard, deep brown eyes, and a sword which probably sings better than you do. Gidrak smiled. This old geezer is more observant than anyone else in here, he mused. Forgive me, old man, but as I just said, I'm looking for information, and I was told you're the person I must seek. I don't care what you want. You're no traveller unless I am the High King of the Alfar, and I do not know it. He made some movements with his mouth as if he had a hard time chewing and swallowing, as if he was trying to think. He looked at Gidrak again. You aren't like those other dogs in here. You're a lordling, and I can see it. A hero you are, like one of those that go this way and that, and who save golden-haired girlies of fairy tales from thieves and maids and dragons, girlies who spread their legs to them later to give fodder to more city songs about what good killers and fuckers heroes like you are. He uttered the word hero, and his face contracted, as if he was swallowing poison. Gidrak laughed loudly. You have interesting opinions, old man. And yes, I can admit that I am myself one of those heroes you described, although I'm trying not to show it. It is true, however, that many of us give our trade a bad name with our deeds. Tostig snorted in disdain. You reckon you're better than us, the simple folk. You're strong, you're long-limbed, and you can use those swords just as good as you can use your cocks. But deep down inside you, you're just as shallow and empty, if not even shallower and emptier than us. What motivates you? Glory? Life itself is hard for us the rest, and you hunt down danger, having solved all your problems without being interested in helping the people around you, who may be starving or may be sick. Gidrak did not answer that, as Tostig was already drunk, and maybe it was best to let him say whatever he wanted to say. He had no reason to start a debate with him, mainly because he wanted his help. After a short while, Tostig took a brave sip of ale and looked at him again, his anger having dissipated, but his eyes, however, still nailed on Gidrak. Say what you want. I'm looking for the female dragon's nest, he told him truthfully. Tostig burst into a chuckle, a muffled laugh that came out of him with some difficulty, and Giderak downed the rest of his beer with one large mouthful, annoyed, listening to the old man making fun of him. He thought that perhaps one should be a little drunk to converse with a drunk, and so turned towards the counter and raised his hand to one of the serving girls so she could refill his cup. In the meantime, Tostig stopped laughing and started coughing and whispering curses and unintelligible phrases by himself to himself, as the girl struggled to get away from the hands of men that wanted to fill her up or pull her to sit on someone's lap as she passed between the tables. When she came in front of them, he looked at her nervously, as if she was something strange that he could never have, something which made him feel ashamed. But as the girl was refilling Giderak's cup, he placed his own cup right next to the other and made a movement to her, with his thumb pointing downwards, as if he were asking her to refill his too. She looked at Giderak to take his permission, and Giderak nodded positively. After the girl left, struggling for one more time to avoid the hands that were trying to grope her, Tostig found his old self again. Those scumbags act as if they're big, strong men, but would sit their pants and would go straight to their mummies if anyone ever asked them to face that female dragon. He was inspecting Giderak with those hazy eyes of his, as if his mood had changed a bit, as if he was regarding him more seriously, and then pulled his cowl backwards for his old, wrinkled face to appear, green veins and white skin, a horizontal scar on the forehead over the left eye. "And you're looking for her?" He said those words with disbelief. "You do seem different, and for some reason you give me the impression that you've seen dragons in the past." He took a deep breath and sighed heavily. "I suppose I can tell you where she is. Besides, I'm not being asked every day about her." And so Tostig explained to him, and Giderak listened to him carefully. The female dragon's nest was 2 days somewhere to the north of Dane, in the heart of some woods in the Siemnoski province, and he told him exactly how and from where he should make his approach, what to do there, which time would be best to go inside the cave. At the end of the conversation, Giderak was impressed with the information Tostig had, but also with his observation skills. During the course of his narration, the old man admitted that due to his own curiosity, he himself had also gone to the cave quite a few times, as the female dragon had appeared in the area during the last 3 months. He also told him that he had tried to enter the cave, but the dragon's grumbling sounds from the depths had prevented him. He had, however, observed her coming and going at certain hours of the day, and knew that dragons were creatures that liked keeping a habit in their lives. The particular comment was what surprised Giderak, which was actually true, but it was something known only to people who had seen and researched dragons from up close, an observation that remained very well hidden inside dusty tomes in the basement of the library of Neferkath. And then he asked Tostig how he knew so much, not only about the female dragon, but about the nature of dragons as well. Tostig smiled, spit on the floor, and a derisive chuckle came out of his mouth again. "So, the lordling wants to know my story, huh?" he said. "Well, all right, since I told you whatever you wanted. I don't have anything better to do right now, and besides, you're buying." Giderak gave a signal to one of the serving girls to refill their cups, and when she came and left again, Tostig started talking to him with a low, almost whispering voice. "It all started when I was about 10 years old, and I lived with my father somewhere far from here, in a forsaken and abandoned province. It's not important where exactly, nor is it important to tell you where I come from. We were poor folk among poor folk, even though my father had managed to build a house while my mother was still alive, and he owned some animals and a few fields, and from these we made our living. Back then, whenever my father and the work we had in the fields allowed me to, I used to play with the other children of the village in the forest very close to our homes, when one day, during one of our many games, we approached a tower on the other side of the forest. No one knew how that tower had been built. The old-timers, the old men and women of the village, used to say that they awoke one morn of a day many years ago to go their fields, and saw the tower standing there behind the forest in the horizon. They were never approaching it, and all the people in our village were telling us never to approach it either, as oftentimes they had seen an old man dressed in black coming and going, walking around the tower. And they were saying that this old man was a mage, as he lived in a tower which had been built overnight. But on that day, we crossed the forest, and we found ourselves close to it, very close. The only tree in the perimeter of the tower, a clearing with a diameter of about 100 meters, was a lanky thing which did not look like one of the trees we knew, and its fruits were big, fat, red, as we watched them from afar. We assumed they were apples, and that the tree was a thin and dried apple tree. When we saw that apple tree, we wagered among us that no one was brave enough to go and pick one of those big, juicy, and ruby apples hanging from its branches. I was always a headstrong child, and it would not be the first fruit I would pick from a tree in a stranger's field. It was only an apple, right? A fucking apple. He was looking at the table, and his words were carrying a deep sorrow, despite the many years that had passed. He was regretting for what he had done, for what had happened, for that day which had affected him, had changed his life. Gidrak remained silent, could imagine that the story would not have a nice end from the moment the maids had made his appearance. The mages of the humans were few and therefore outlaws, did not obey to rules and laws, no one could stop them or limit them, and so in their vast majority they were scumbags and rogues. Gidrak had only ever met 2 of them in his life, and both fit the stereotype exactly. The old man drank some more beer and went on. Like kids as we were, we did not pay much attention to the stories about the screams and yells that the older ones told us could be heard in the surrounding fields from that tower, nor about the forest inside which we were playing and anything that was supposed to live inside it. We had explored that forest a lot, and we had not found anything strange, except for a big hole, a pit, which many of us thought bottomless, because we threw rocks inside it but never heard them falling or landing on another surface. And I was the most reckless of them all, and did not want the other kids to make fun of me, to call me a coward. I went all flouncy-like up to the tree without attempting to hide, and managed to pick an apple, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was not an apple, of course, and I understood it as I was watching it from up close. The tree was pitch black, even though its trunk seemed of a natural color from far away, and its fruits were red and hard, but they were not apples. They looked like pine cones. You have seen pine cones, yes? You must surely have. That fruit could open. I did not know, nor do I know today even how and when it would open, but it would surely open at one point like a pine cone. It had the same scales on it. Yet it was foreign, and I had never seen it before. The other children, however, were watching me from the edge of the forest, and had decided among themselves to start shouting that the mage was behind me as soon as I picked that apple, to scare me. In truth, he had not seen us, nor had he understood we were near, but he heard their shouting, and when I picked that strange apple. Yet I believed them. I got scared, and then I started running back to the forest to get back to the others. But somewhere in the middle of the distance, my feet froze, went numb, and I dropped down unable to move. Much later, I would learn that it was a spell of paralysis. Most of the children ran away, but I shouted to them, pleaded for them to help me, and 3 of the boys were brave enough to run towards me. I heard them coming. But then the doors of the tower opened with a loud sound. That mage came out, and even those 3 children ran away, and I stayed there, the spell having run through me whole, unable to even close my eyes. But I could move them. I could watch behind me, with the angle my body had taken. He came over me and inspected me for some time, undressed me, and with a large knife he was carrying on his belt, he took my genitals, and as he was doing so he spoke, chanted, in an unknown foreign language. When he was done, he told me that this was the price I had to pay for picking one of the fruits of that tree. He threw my organs in a black sack on his belt and departed, left me there. With excruciating pains that came in waves, I managed, after about half an hour, to stand up and return home, blooded and disgraced, as I passed through the village and everyone watched me, terrified. Tostig started coughing again. It was the same muffled cough that suggested he had fat pieces of phlegm in his throat, which prevented him from breathing. Gidrak already felt bad with the story, as he could imagine the scenes taking place in front of him, and had regretted asking him the reason he knew so much. But he could not stop him now, and after some more ale, Tostig went on. I returned in tears to my home, to my father, and told him what had happened. He gave me a hard beating and then dragged me to his cart, loaded me onto it, and took me to the mage's tower again. Not one of our fellow villagers followed him nor helped him pull the cart. He shouted for the mage to come down, and when he did come after a while, he told him he wanted revenge or compensation for what he had done, and threatened that he would kill him if he did not receive something for the deed to be repaid. He even unsheathed his sword. Tostig smiled enigmatically. Was it the sorrow or the pleasure of the memory? Gidrak could not understand. The mage only spoke some strange, incomprehensible words, and then my father's head exploded like a pumpkin, and blood and brains splattered all around. I was shocked, fell to my knees, and started crying again, unable to believe all that had happened that day, all that had deconstructed my life in seconds. And then the mage came over me once again, asked me to calm down, wipe my tears, And he broke me right there. He destroyed me, a little further away from that lanky tree, next to my father's headless corpse, while I was stained with his blood. And for as long as the deed lasted, he kept chanting in that foreign and unintelligible language, which could have been the same as he had used earlier, or maybe a different one. I never learned. The air inside the inn started changing, becoming colder. The time was passing and night had fallen outside. The room was slowly emptying. The windows had been opened for clean air to come in. The music had stopped for some time now. Conversations could only be heard from the nearby tables, and Giderak was uneasy with all he had just listened to. Tostig went on. Immediately after, he dragged me back to his tower, tended to the wound he had opened on me, and gave me various ointments to apply on it to avoid an infection, and he kept me there. He made me his student and his lover, and he taught me many things like reading and writing, but he never initiated me in the art he possessed, that of magic. He did not trust me enough, or did not see the spark of the talent, as he called it, inside me. I don't know, he did not tell me. It was from him and his books that I learned all that I know. One morning, almost 10 years later, I woke up and didn't find him in the tower. He had left everything as they were and had simply disappeared. I waited for him for about 6 months, for as long as the provisions in the cellar lasted, but he did not return. I did not learn where he went. With his departure, that strange tree, the Olanthos, as that was what he had called it once or twice, withered completely. Ash only remained on that spot, and he had told me if its fruits. He had not told me if its fruits would ever open, nor had he even asked of me to water it. So I left the tower, as I had to make a living somehow, and I tried to enter the world again, heading to the opposite direction from my old village. I traveled a lot and became a thief, a beggar, an erotic slave for rich people who had all sorts of perversions in their heads. I'm not happy nor content with my life, but it is what it is, and it is too late to change it. Sometimes I wonder how many thousands of choices we have in our lives, yet how few, handful really, are the choices that really matter, and that when we look back, we realize that our hands were tied in those exact moments when we would give everything for them to be free. So be it. Cursed may that maid's be, wherever he is, and rot in his bones and his memory even. Silence rose between them both for a few seconds. The story was now finished. Giderak did not know what to say to him, so he remained silent, drinking the rest of his ale. The story had not surprised him. All the mages, those he met, those he had learned about from books and stories, were involving themselves with things they did not truly understand. Tostig was the one who broke the silence and spoke again. And now, after I told you about me, it is time for you to tell me why you want to kill the female dragon. He could not find and could not think of a reason not to tell him. He opened his backpack and took out a vial filled with a black liquid that left a suspicion of a reddening in the eye. Inside it, small red fibers frolicked under the light of the lens of lit candles of the inn around them. Dragon's blood, he told him quietly. I need it for some alchemical experiments of mine. The female dragon appeared very abruptly in this area only the last 3 months, so I thought I would come and take a look. Tostig started laughing, another laugh of his that contained his hard and all too well known now derision of his. It gets even better. You want to kill her, he told him tauntingly. And then his eyes gleamed, and his face and voice became a little more conspiratorial, cold, ominous. What experiments are you doing? A drink to push the forgetfulness away, perhaps? He asked him with a sly smile. Giderak felt a tingle down his spinal cord. He swallowed nervously and clenched his jaw. The old man knew much, way too much, as if he could read his thoughts. Tostig went on. I know, young man, he said with solemn meaning. I've read many more and much more than these words you meet out there or in here. It is a very hard experiment, as much as I remember. Have you found all other ingredients? As he spoke, that otherworldly sense which bothered Giderak left his voice. The old man's words and face now betrayed only an honest interest. Giderak did not reply. Within the last minute of their conversation, he had regretted the fact he had started a conversation with Tostig. Mainly, he had regretted the fact that he had probably drunk a lot without realizing it, and as a result had relaxed too much and had lost the flow of the conversation. He had gotten an indeterminate headache in the last few minutes. The dragons have lost much of their strength in the last few decades, Tostig said. The weather and the climate have changed too much. In the past, it was hard for knights and for trained dragon hunters even to kill them. Only the Alpha were managing it properly. And talking about them, just a few months back I heard that some humans or some Alpha, the rumors were not exactly clear, killed the dragon god of the Alpha in the southwest, inside their forest, and very easily at that. And a while later, those stinking Alpha started fighting one another. Did you hear about it? Tostig was well informed, could add information up, and was throwing his bait right at that moment. Gidrak had already decided not to give him the pleasure, but he could not understand whether it was too late now. He knew that the Alpha were in the middle of their last civil war. He maintained his indifferent expression and simply shrugged when this last question was asked. I heard, but I do not know if it is true. Many things are being said and heard nowadays, and you don't know who you can truly believe anymore. He stood up, wanting to show he was getting ready to leave. I'm sorry for getting up, old man, but it is late and I will be leaving early tomorrow. Do you want some more beer? He asked him. If he was lucky, Tostig would faint while drinking and would not remember anything the next day. Send me a picture with one of the girls as you'll be going. Remember to do everything that I told you so you can catch her asleep, hear me? You are one of the few I've met in here worth something, maybe even the only one, so I'll give you my wish if it means something to you. Gidrak placed a pouch with a few counted silver coins on the table and next to Tostig's cup. I don't have any other way to thank you for the information, he told him. Take these coins and I will send you some more beer with a girl, as you asked of me. May your gods watch over you, if you believe in something, old man. The gods, Tostig shouted, in the almost empty now common room. You think they exist? Cursed be they themselves. If I still had my cock, I would not thank them, I would fuck them. And you would see what nice little bastards old Tostig would have with one of those beautiful, golden-haired, cock-choking goddesses. But the gods allowed the maids to cut off my dick, and so I can't treat them the way I'd like. So be it. I still have my fucked life and my liver. To whale your money shall go, stranger. Thank you for listening to my story. Now leave me be. He raised his cowl again to hide and for no one to bother him, and started coughing again, that same muffled and heavy cough, the cough that suggested the serious sickness. Gidrak left and went to the counter and to the innkeeper to send a pitcher of beer to Tostig and eat something himself, as he had forgotten about it. A girl was cleaning the nearby tables with water and a dirty rag, but when the innkeeper told her to go bring beer and whatever food was left for Gidrak, she went to the back room, which must have been the pantry. Gidrak told the innkeeper he would pay for everything in the morning, simply to let him simmer in his avarice, thinking about the money overnight. A short while later, the girl returned with a wooden plate of beef, hard cheese and bread for Gidrak in one hand, and the pitcher in the other. Gidrak took his food, wished her a good night, ignored the innkeeper, and went up the stairs to go to his room. When he entered, he found a half-melted candle burning and someone sleeping in his bed. He recognized the beautiful face of the girl from Caleth that he had sent up earlier, who had undressed, her clothes strewn on the floor, and had fallen asleep inside the clean seats while she waited for him. The time had passed, his mood had been soured by the story, by the bad beer, by Tostig. He was hungry, he felt tired, and his head was buzzing. He did not want to speak with another person right that moment. He looked at her sweet face for some time. Under different circumstances, he would have woken her up. She was very pretty. What had happened to her to be doing this job? What had happened to his mother? He did not even want to think. He left her a few coins on the small table next to the side of the bed she slept in, sat on a chair at the table that was in the room, ate silently, and then sat down on the floor on one of the room's corners, steadying his back against the wall to try and sleep. He placed his backpack under his legs, crossed his arms, and rested his head against the wall before closing his eyes. The creaking from the window's wooden outer shutter managed to lull him to sleep. His sleep was restless, however, and an old dream, the fight on the steppe, and that dawn which would never come, tormented him again. When he woke up the next morning, the bed was unmade but empty. The girl and her clothes had disappeared, the coins the same too, and it did not seem like she had tried to touch his belongings. He stood up, washed his face with clean water from a bucket next to the door, and went down to the common room. The inn was empty at that hour, except for the innkeeper who was sitting behind the counter and was using a dagger to remove dirt from his nails. He did not greet him. 10 silver altogether for the room, the horse, the beer, and the food, he only told him. Gidrak gave him as much as he asked for and turned to leave without saying a word. The child from the previous day was brushing Sandrisa's mane when he entered the stable, something which surprised him. He was not expecting a particularly good job, but she looked full, rested, clean, and in a good mood. The boy was sweaty, even though the day had just started, and his smile as he brushed the horse showed that he really liked working with animals. Gidrak approached them and whistled approvingly to improve the boy's mood. "Very nice job, young one." "Thank you, sir. You have a very beautiful horse." "I thank you too, but I'm not a knight, so there's no reason addressing me that way." He had not been a knight for many years now. He caressed his horse, and it whinnied softly, breathing out in his palm. "That grown-out piece of lard inside, the innkeeper, is he your father?" They did not look too alike, or else he would have been more careful with what he was saying. "He is the brother of my mother, so my uncle," the boy lowered his eyes. "My mother died at childbirth, and he didn't have kids of his own, so he took me as his son. The inn will know better days when it passes on in your hands. Now it barely passes for a pigsty." He put 2 silver coins in the boy's palm. "Hold on to it, and take care." The boy gave him a bright smile, petted Sandrisa one last time, and left to go wash himself and resume the labors of the day as Gidrak saddled his horse and left, swiftly riding away north without looking back. 2 days later, he reached the area in the forest where Tostig had told him he would find the female dragon's cave. The ground in the forest itself had started changing, taking up a dried grey-black hue, which suggested frequent fires. There would not be any animals around. The herbivores would not find something to eat, and the carnivores would not find herbivores, so he knew he would not meet wolves. He searched for a quiet place far enough from the cave to tie his horse, to make camp and rest, to wait for nightfall. As the day passed, he ate an apple, a piece of the bread, and some of the salted meat he had bought the day before from a family of sheep herders, which he met in the pastures next to the road. They complained to him about the female dragon and confirmed she was descending on their fields from somewhere in the north. Later in the afternoon, he went out and started scouting the area surrounding the cave, trying to find the best point from where to approach it. Togstig's advice was good, but Gidrak was not a novice, and he had enough experience to evaluate everything he saw. He found human bones and rusted, broken armor everywhere, remnants of other adventurers or of a skirmish that had taken place there. He was troubled when he saw some footprints which seemed to be fresh, but it had rained that same morning, and it was hard to be certain, as they looked older. He wondered whether it would be best to leave and return to Neferkath. There was something he didn't like, something which gave him a bad feeling for what he was about to do, something that did not sit right within him. He would not have helped this time like in the past. He had seen dragons die, however, and Tostig had convinced him that it would be easy, and this cleared his last doubts. He returned to the place where he had left Sandrisa and waited for the sun to fall. The night birds were the ones that announced the coming of the night, and according to Tostig, the female dragon would be sleeping right at that time. He spent almost an hour outside the cave, hidden in the tree line, waiting to see if the female dragon would come out, if Tostig had lied to him. But he could hear nothing. The absolute silence of the forest only broke occasionally by the cries of ravens from different directions. He decided that he could try going inside. He passed through the entrance, moving slowly, waiting for so his eyes could get used to the darkness. From deeper inside the cave he could hear a heavy, rhythmic sound. He could now see better, and so moved even deeper, until he was able to make out in the darkness a dark mountain. It was her. He could faintly see her stomach rising and falling, felt the warmth of her body, of her breath. He silently unsheathed his well-sharpened sword, coated with the poison he had once stolen from an other world, and which he knew all too well could kill a dragon, and prepared to sink it between his eyes as he was asleep. He had 5 more steps to make. It seemed easy. Too easy. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a bone being crunched to his right, as if someone stepped on it. He turned to look, but it was too dark, and he could barely discern something like a black figure. He did not dare say something to shout, because, with the corner of his eye, he saw the black mass of the female dragon rising, and then he turned to look at her, and her eyes gleamed red like 2 fiery coals in the darkness. The only thought that had time to form in his mind was a doubt for everything that was transpiring. Were they real? Was this truly reality? Was he awake? He did not hear the heavy voice speaking only one word in a language he could not understand, a language which sounded like flames which spoke. He did not hear the familiar cough coming from where he heard the bone cracking. He only had time enough to see orange and red shapes forming, and then quickly coming towards his direction, and his next breath was fire. And then came the dark.